it was quite incredible how well everyone worked together on that. And also some of the elements that came out of the Iran nuclear deal are very applicable in the next couple of days. For example, they looked at the whole nuclear supply chain, if you like, what it takes to create trust when you are developing a domestic nuclear industry without breaking out into a military one. And some of the protocols put in place there were very applicable here.
We're seeing the mobile stairway moving its way towards the jet, and it's been interesting to watch this because each jet that has arrived has been of a different size, so they have to adjust for that. So you'll see this move into position, but it'll have to obviously go up some as we wait for the door to open. And actually, they've managed to get it pretty close, actually, as you look at it here. Again, basically what you'll see is the Chinese president will exit along with his delegation. They'll come down. They'll be met by a color guard standing on the tarmac. The flags, as I mentioned, unfurled, the Chinese flag, the U.S. flag. A delegation from the State Department will greet them. And then we will also see a number of vehicles arrive, and then he'll be whisked off to his hotel where he'll be staying. Nathan, one area that I think we haven't talked about, we talked about the area of concern where the U.S. and China have their differences on the South China Sea, but China also has some concerns about this THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, this anti-missile system that the U.S. has been talking to the ROK about, yes. Placing as kind of a deterrent to the DPRK. This is something that both Russia and China have expressed grave concerns about, correct?
Absolutely, and it looks like those talks are not going further between the U.S. And the Republic of Korea, because China felt, and it does understand, of course, that the tensions on the Korean Peninsula are high, but also if you deploy a missile system like that so close to China's borders, it actually can be a sovereignty issue when it comes to China as well, detecting, for example, Chinese movements on its territories. And despite the US saying that wasn't what it was for, it may have actually been able to do that anyway. And so there was a feeling that that could be inherently destabilizing in a situation which actually needed stabilizing. So that is a big difference as well. And I think, you know, this whole talk about the DPRK, we don't often hear it here in Washington, but Chinese security concerns also have to come into play here. They are worried about the stability of the DPRK. If there was to be any collapse of government, you would have a refugee problem. Who and what would actually be on the border of China? So all these things, which the US recognizes as well, are talked about often and openly when it comes to trying to find a way forward on the Korean Peninsula. That is definitely going to come up in the bilateral, the one-on-one between the US and China. They talk about the DPRK all the time. They're also going to talk about trade issues, cybersecurity issues, and obviously other issues of importance, including the nuclear summit here as well. Some trade might be in there. You know, there will be also follow-on from the climate conference in Paris as well. So there's going to be lots to talk about.
Yeah, and when it comes to Chinese leaders coming to the United States, certainly Xi Jinping is not a stranger. Coming here so many years ago with that visit to Iowa that was talked about, came here as a vice president, met with Joe Biden, was just here, as you mentioned, back in September. And these meetings with Obama, I mean, when you look back at Sunnylands, they seem to have a rather informal, engaged relationship, perhaps a little bit more strained during the state visit back in September, but again, they met in Paris. Talk to me about the bilateral talks tomorrow. Have these two developed a relationship where they can really kind of let their hair down and discuss just about anything?
Yeah, and we saw it in Sunnylands, we saw it afterwards in Beijing too, when these two leaders meet, they do actually talk and see eye to eye and have progress. The climate, for example, agreement, which was sometimes underestimated, but that was very important in Beijing, for example, because what it did was it capped Chinese emissions for the first time and actually brought in US reductions as well. For a long time, developing countries, like China still is, have argued that they should have emissions going forward because they're playing catch-up with the Western powers that largely polluted the atmosphere on their own. But the agreements that were worked out set a model for developed and developing countries throughout the climate change community. That was extremely important. So it's when these two powers can work out these sort of things, whether it's over the DPRK or climate change, that it's extremely important. There are differences. South China Sea sovereignty issues is going to be something that cannot necessarily be solved just by talking about it one-on-one. There are very big differences on that, but at least they're open and candid about when there are differences as well. There will, of course, be that one-on-one bilateral meeting. There'll also be talking here at the White House at the working dinner as well, because they'll be sitting next to each other, and also at the convention center where they will be as well. There'll be plenty of chances to talk as well. So even though there's going to be 40-plus world leaders, foreign ministers, and other organizational heads as well, it's going to be a chance for the US and China to talk a lot as well. What's going to be interesting also is to see who else President Xi speaks to as well, because it's a very Asia-centric gathering here. Of course, we have President Park from the Republic of Korea. We have Narendra Modi as well. There's been a lot of meetings between and talks between Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping as well, and of course Prime Minister Shinzo Abe as well, where there is lines of communication that have been reinvigorated, if you like. And of course, nuclear security is something that both countries have a vested interest, as well as stability in Northeast China Sea as well.
Nathan, one more quick question before we pivot to Sean Caleb's. I just, it's interesting. It's an election year here in the United States, and we tend to see a lot of China bashing during election years. This year, no different than others. And Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense, recently testifying up on Capitol Hill, was pressed by one member of Congress to basically uninvite China to RIMPAC, and he stood his ground and said, no, we want China involved in this. And this kind of goes to the relationship, and I'd like maybe for you to talk about this, because I know you went to RIMPAC last go-round. The fact that, sailor to sailor, from admiral to admiral, all the way up to mid-level people within each department, all the way up to the presidents of these respective countries. The relationship built from the bottom up in many respects.
Well, there's a lot of lessons being learned between the US-China relationship over time, and the military-to-military ties are very important. Why? Because they actually mean that you avoid misunderstandings, or potentially avoid misunderstandings. If you work together in naval exercises, if you officers meet each other, if they establish protocols for giving early warnings about what they're doing, misunderstandings, can be avoided. And this is not just on paper. You remember back in 2001 when George W. Bush was president here in the US, the Hainan Island incident, where there was a mid-air collision, a Chinese pilot was killed, US pilots landing on Hainan Island detained. There was big tensions at the beginning of that relationship with that US president as well. Lessons have been learned going forward. And yes, you're right, China bashing, it happens in every US election, but military-to-military ties will go forward. That's the message from this administration.
We're waiting for the door to open. It should open within seconds. You can see the camera being buffeted by these heavy winds that we were showing you earlier, the flags being tossed about, and we see the delegation now moving up to open the door. And we expect Chinese President Xi Jinping to exit shortly. It's been a long wait. We went on the air a while back. We've watched a number of delegations, countries arrive, and this is the one the most anticipated as we see this major power, China, coming and arriving here in Washington, just outside Washington, D.C. Sean, well, let me fire a question in your direction, because I know that this is one of the things I was talking to a security expert just the other day. The concern about perhaps complacency when it comes to security issues at some of these plants, these facilities, is that a concern that you're hearing as well?
Yeah, it's a big concern. And Mike, I got to tell you, I don't have a monitor, so as soon as President Xi arrives, please don't hesitate to cut me off. But that's one thing we heard at the roundtable this morning, that, you heard the one gentleman say an accident anywhere is an accident everywhere, and there have been accidents. Then he went on to say, now the concern is a security breach anywhere would be a security breach everywhere. There hasn't been one, and that's what everybody is aware of. And when they talk about the complacency that could build in, one individual said, this is not an industry that does well when you get complacent. And I thought that really rang true as much as anything. And then we heard Sun Qing, the the chairman of the board of China's National Nuclear Corporation, say that China has enacted a number of laws to protect its nuclear enterprises, its nuclear power within that country. So many countries are doing everything they can. And when it gets down to measuring the nuclear material, the enriched uranium or the plutonium, that they measure down to the smallest amount, so they always keep track of it, so they know that in the transportation or storage of that all-important material, that they never lose sight of it, never lose track of it, and that has become so important in this day and age.
Yeah, physical protection, material accountability, just having a security culture, I guess, in place. And also storage of spent materials. I know that you've done some stories on that out west here in the United States. That's obviously been a concern over time as well.
That is a huge, huge thorn in the side of the U.S. What to do with this? They went to one site in New Mexico. It was supposed to last 50,000 years undeterred, completely safe, buried far beneath the ground in an old salt dome. Didn't play out that way. About 25 years after they first began storing it, lids actually blew off of some of those canisters, and it began to leak out. And they store the cans on top of each other. So they had to go in with robots and see just how bad the damage was. And that's something that, how do you clean something like that up? And how can you go back in and continue to use that area? Storing of everything from low-level radioactive waste that they use in hospitals to the really heavy-duty stuff. You see it at nuclear plants has always been a major concern, and really no one has come up with a great answer of how you take care of this, how you get rid of it. Can it be used a different way? You talk about a half-life that goes on for centuries. It's a huge concern. There's
so many dimensions to this. We're actually seeing the door open. I know you said you didn't have a monitor, so there you have it. And we are starting to see a couple of people, some movement there. We see one person exiting, and here comes the delegation. Hopefully we can get a tighter shot and we can identify the Chinese president. He comes off as they make their way down the staircase and onto the tarmac, where they will be greeted by U.S. State Department officials and a color guard, which is carrying the flags of both the United States and China. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they will have a motorcade that will whisk them out of here. They're trying to stagger these arrivals throughout the hour and throughout the evening. We have several more dignitaries. Justin Trudeau from Canada is expected, I think, in the next hour. British Prime Minister Cameron also expected later. French President Francois Hollande as well. And as we've been showing you, I would not want to be the air traffic controller out there at Joint Base Andrews, because you've got a lot of planes coming in, many of them circling the tarmac and then finally making their way here. And we've got a couple more people exiting the plane. We're expecting President Xi Jinping within seconds to emerge and come out that doorway and make his way down the staircase and down onto the ground there at Andrews, and then he will be on his way. Of course, just leave, there he is there, waving to the crowd below, President Xi Jinping of China. He's just left Prague, where he had 3 days in the Czech Republic, a very fruitful trip there, where he signed a strategic partnership agreement with the Czech Republic. Here you see him shaking hands with one of the diplomatic affairs officials from the State Department, being greeted, and then he will make his way to the rest of the delegation as he continues to shake hands. And this will be the start of another big push for the Chinese president, who's been on a whirlwind travel schedule, if you will. As we mentioned, he was in the Czech Republic. He's been here in the United States about 6 months ago for a state visit, and now here he is again for another 48 hours before he heads back. Let's check in again with Nathan King. We also see the Chinese ambassador to the United States standing there in the background. You can see him as well, Ambassador Sui. And here comes the rest of the delegation making its way off the plane. One of the things that's interesting, Nathan, I was talking to somebody about, can you actually get into the convention center? And they said, probably not. We see Wang Yi there, the foreign minister, also exiting. He said, probably not. Everybody ends up with about 3 seats. That's about it, because these delegations are so big.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been inside delegations before, and you better keep up with them, otherwise you get lost. You've got to keep up inside that bubble, and they're whirlwind delegation. They set every minute of every day is basically planned in advance in meticulous detail. The protocols very much observed to try and pack as much into the schedule, to shake as many hands, to talk to the people you need to talk to and move things forward. There is a list in every delegation of what they want to be achieved, who they want to see, and what they want delivered. Not all of it ever gets done, but that doesn't stop from people drawing up a wish list, whatever nation you are. Very big delegations generally, not as large obviously for the state visit. Remember, we saw a lot of people traveling with Xi Jinping, whether it was on the West Coast and that historic visit to Boeing and that big aircraft order, or whether it was here. Remember, of course, there was lots of business opportunities on both the East and the West Coast here. Here is a much shorter visit, much more intently focused on the Nuclear Security Summit, also on areas of bilateral importance with the US and China. And it comes, of course, after a 3-day visit to the Czech Republic, and then it's back to Beijing. But you're right about this Chinese president, one of the most traveled in history. And remember, China doesn't have Air Force One like the US, so very much using Air China to the best of their abilities.
Yeah, the interesting thing for those of you watching at home, it is 7:32 here on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. But for Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, he's still probably on Prague time, which is 1:32 a.m. So undoubtedly, one would think he's probably exhausted, and we'll look forward to hitting the bed at the hotel when he arrives there as we start to see his limo leaving the Joint Base there at Andrews. Slow procession here, and he will be heading to his hotel shortly. And that'll do it for our coverage here. We'll be back with much more news in about an hour and a half. Stay with us. We'll have much more on the Nuclear Security Summit as the evening progresses.